On Election Day, Judge Lucinda Jesson won election to the Minnesota Court of Appeals, and she has quite an impressive resume. Before that, she worked at the Attorney General's office under Skip Humphrey. She worked for Hennepin County Attorney's office under Amy Klobuchar. She was Minnesota's second longest serving Commissioner of Human Services under Governor Mark Dayton. And he appointed her to the appeals court in 2016. She was elected this year. We welcome her to the program. What's next? We're talking about what's next. So well, first, congratulations on your election.
Oh, thank you. I'm just so delighted. It was an honor to be appointed by the governor, but it just feels so much better actually to be elected by so many Minnesotans.
Now, this is the first campaign you've had to run, right?
Yes, it is. And I really never saw myself as a statewide candidate, but I've so enjoyed it.
Okay. So I mentioned all these jobs that you've had. I mean, it's a pretty impressive resume.
Mike, can I just say you missed a couple?
I missed a couple, right. I mean, I just hit the highlights here, okay, because we only have, a few minutes here to talk today. I mean, I could have listed them all. We would be going all this time. But you've had a real variety of jobs here in different forms of public service. Now, what's the difference between those jobs and what you do as a judge?
Well, first of all, I think those jobs really help me get ready to be a better judge, because in the Court of Appeals, we really see it all. Criminal cases, civil cases, cases involving individuals, businesses. And so all the different jobs I had gave me a breadth of experience that's helped me. But I would say that a difference is, in a lot of those jobs, especially when you're deputy county attorney or certainly a commissioner of human services, you have to make a lot of important decisions and you need to make them very quickly. On the Court of Appeals, we have the blessing, and it's important because our decisions are precedential. They affect not only the people before us, but all Minnesotans. So we have a little more time. So we issue opinions in 90 days, but that gives us time to consult and reflect in a way that often in other public service jobs you don't get.
Now, obviously, when somebody comes before you, it's a particular case, there's particular, things that's being decided and people involved, but the decisions you make could have ramifications beyond that case all the time.
Exactly. So when I decide a case, I try and think about what the law is, about how it affects the parties before me, but I also know that the decision we make gives guidance to district judges, about 300 of them all across our state, about how they should be interpreting the law. So you try and think about those ramifications as well.
What makes a decision tough? Because, you get some time, obviously, to make a decision. I'm not going to ask you about any particular decision. Would you look at it, though? What makes it tough for you to make a decision?
I've thought about that question a lot because I spent a lot of time in the campaign and in my regular job going around Minnesota and talking to people, and people ask me that question. It's not the cases that are legally tough, because we get some really complicated constitutional and civil cases. The cases that I find the hardest are the ones where the families before us and a district judge decided to terminate that parent's parental rights because of concerns about abuse and neglect, and they've taken the children from the home. And those are such hard cases because usually the parents love their children, the children love their parents, but it's just not safe to have them together, often because of addiction. And those cases are really hard.
Are we seeing more of those these days?
We are. We're seeing them more at the district court level, and then as a result, we're seeing them on the appellate level. And I do think the problems of substance use disorder is really driving a lot of that.
Decisions you make obviously impact people. When you make a decision, what difference does it make in the life of people? What have you seen that it makes a difference in the life of people?
Well, when you think about it, in the Court of Appeals, we do have criminal cases, large and small, about everything except for the first-degree murder that goes to the Supreme Court. But we also do family law cases. We have will probate cases, commitment cases, just basic contract cases, those child protection cases. So they impact a lot of people's lives directly, because we decide about 2,000 matters a year, but also just other people who end up in family court. Think about it. A lot of folks end up either with disputes over, if they're in dissolution, their marriage is dissolving, child custody issues. A decision that we make at the Court of Appeals gives direction to those district court judges about how to decide those cases, and those affect a lot of Minnesotans.
Do you ever see where the law and the needs of the people sometimes just don't quite go together, and you want to do something? Can you do something?
Sure. But our job as judges is not to go and create the law. That really is, the legislature should be creating the law, though there are times that we have to look at that, and I've had to do this and say, wait, hold on. At some point, if the law violates the Constitution, then the legislature's gone too far. But overall, we are very deferential. If I wanted to be the policymaker making all these decisions, I should have run for the legislature, not the Court of Appeals, and I'm very cognizant of that.
Big cases like that, I know you can't talk about specifics and that kind of stuff, but are there big cases out there looming that we should be watching and be interested in what the Court of Appeals is going to be doing this year?
Well, I think of all, not just the Court of Appeals, but there are a lot of issues out there that people should pay attention to. Just in general, for an example. So we have the Fourth Amendment of our Constitution. Minnesota and United States Constitution says we're going to protect people from unreasonable searches and seizures by the government. But what's a search these days is different with all the new technology. If you think about it, you know, when our founding fathers were saying no unreasonable search and seizures, they probably hadn't contemplated cell phone technology. And so we in the courts are having to grapple with applying the critical protections of our Constitution to new technologies. That's an area that I think is important, not just at the Court of Appeals, but at the Minnesota Supreme Court and the U.S. Supreme Court. That's one example of these types of tough issues that appellate courts have to deal with.
Now, obviously, in the judicial system, we try to have precedent. We stick with precedent. But some of that stuff comes up through the courts to you. Some of it's happening in other states. Do you pay attention to what's going on in other states or other courts just to go, okay, that might bubble up here in Minnesota. I'm interested to see what that Texas is doing about this or what Florida is doing about this because it might impact Minnesota someday.
Certainly, I do think we want to keep up with what's going on. In the Court of Appeals, even for some important of those, for example, constitutional issues that often end up in the Minnesota Supreme Court, they come to us first. And we're having to make decisions. And it's important to look and say, it's not directed, it's not like we have to follow them, but I find it helpful to find and look at what other states have done.
When you get up in the morning, is there anything that just drives you to get to your job, that you're going, this is what I want to do, this is why I do my job?
Absolutely. I often think about the cases that are before us, but then I think of the people who are behind them and the impact that decision can have, not just for the parties, but for people across our state. And, I just feel so good and excited about driving to my job every day. And can I just say, one of the things I really like about the Court of Appeals is we hear cases around the state. So I was hearing cases last month in Brainerd and the month before that in Marshall. And I like to talk to people when I'm out there and get their experiences with the judicial system, because that helps us figure out how we can do a better job.
Now, are you working with other judges? I don't remember the Court of Appeals as a several judge panel, or is it just you, or how does that work?
That's one of the best things about the Court of Appeals. So there are 19 of us on the court, and we decide things in 3 judge panels. So that's another difference than when I was Commissioner of Human Services, when ultimately, I certainly consulted with my staff and obviously the governor, but they were my decisions. And here I get to have to consult with 2 other colleagues and we make that decision together. And those decisions are always better when you hear from others.
Do you go out and have beers later?
Oh, I've had a beer or 2 with some of my colleagues.
With colleagues? I don't know if people talk shop, but at least you build some relationship by doing that.
Absolutely, and relationships in this job, just like in all jobs, I think, are really important. And we are lucky that we have a very collegial court. You hear about some courts where there are fights and a lot going on, lots of tensions. We disagree sometimes with cases, on cases with each other, but we really get along. And that ability to get along with each other means we have this interchange of ideas, which makes our decisions better.
All right. Well, we've been talking with Judge Lucinda Jesson about what's next in her life after she's been elected here, after being appointed. And is it a 4-year term?
It's a 6-year term.
6-year term.
Yes.
So 6-year term. So you'd have to think about running for another 6 years.
I don't, but let me just say, I'm going to continue. Well, I did before, but I'm really inspired to continue to do more around our state of Minnesota, especially in greater Minnesota. I've so enjoyed that part of the campaign.
All right. Well, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you.